Hi everyone. So this week we had to see three movies. We had to see Amistad, The Cause, and Django Unchained. So starting with Amistad, this movie tells the story of a group of slaves who, at the beginning of the movie, they take over a ship, and then they attempt to sell back to Africa. However, they're tricked actually into selling back to the U.S., where they are treated as runaways. So these slaves they had a trial held in the U.S. where they were treated as property instead of humans. And then there was a dispute as to whether they were property of Spain or whether they should be charged as pirates or whether they should be just freed. So after reading some documents that were found on the ship, it actually turns out that they were illegally kidnapped from a Portuguese ship, and then later on in the movie, John Quincy Adams actually becomes involved in the case, and the leader of the Africans, who his name was Sink, I think is how you pronounce it. He tells a story of how he was captured, and in the end, the ruling is in favor of the slaves, who are then set free. And all this entire event increases tension in the U.S., which eventually is what led to the Civil War. So as far as myth goes in this film, the movie itself is a retelling of the story of the Africans. So this is similar in the way that humans retell myths to carry on the story. And then Sink is the leader of the Africans, and he's kind of like the hero who is also the leader and starts the revolt on the ship. And then Sink tells his own story of being captured illegally from the Portuguese ship and everything. So again, this is like in the same way that we retell myths, he was retelling his own story. So as far as ritual goes, we see that there's differences in cultures between the Africans and the Americans. We see African music and African dances, and we see a ritual African burial. Um, as far as cinematography goes, this movie tells the story of a group of people as opposed to just one singular individual. And then also this movie also includes various historical elements while still being dramatized to sort of make the story more exciting. But yeah, it still incorporates a lot of facts and historical themes throughout it. So the purpose of this movie is to tell the story of these specific groups of slaves and how they were treated and how they were viewed during this time. Not just them, but also all slaves. You know how they weren't thought of as people, but as property. So I think that was the purpose of this movie. Moving on to the cause. So this is actually the first part of a I think it was a 9-part miniseries. So this movie was actually more of a documentary, and it goes over the history of slavery and why it started, and it also mentions a few important and well-known historical figures such as Abraham Lincoln and Harriet Tubman. So this movie was the most factual out of all the three, and it didn't really have that much dramatization or individual stories of slavery. This was more of a overview of how slavery started and ended, and it was very factual. It was very cut and dry. Nothing was exaggerated or played out for just for like action or anything. So as far as myth goes, in this film we see again we talk about Harriet Tubman, and Harriet Tubman I think can be looked as sort of similar to the religious figure of Moses, because of how she came back to help the southern slaves come to the north to be free with the Underground Railroad. I think Abraham Lincoln can also be sort of a mythological figure, as the hero. He fought for slavery, and after the Civil War, he ended up being a big reason as to how slavery finally ended in the South. So as far as ritual goes, um, I think the process of how slaves escaped through the Underground Railroad. I thought that was a ritual in and of itself because it was very systematic. There was codes and secret passages, and only certain people knew certain information in order to keep it very functional while still being hidden and successful. So I thought that whole process in and of itself could be viewed as a type of ritual. Um, and then another sort of ritualistic thing that I saw was that the U.S. kind of going through this whole process of going from slavery to fighting about slavery and then finally abolishing slavery. It went through a period of leaving, like when the South seceded, and then it went through a transitionary period of rejoining the U.S. and then an accepting period where they accepted that slavery was no longer legal. Um, As far as cinematography goes, this movie is again a documentary, and it uses a lot of voiceovers and videos to deliver facts and give a factual history of slavery in the U.S. So this movie's purpose, I think, was to convey facts and history, and in a very objective and non dramatized way, as opposed to the other two movies. Now moving on to Django. So this movie is about a slave named Django, and at the beginning of the movie, Django starts off as a slave, but then he soon gets freed by Doctor King Schultz, who is an ex-dentist and is now a bounty hunter, and he needs Django's help identifying three fugitives who used to be his owners. And after Django helps him, the doctor asks him if he would like to be his partner for the winter. After which they can go and find Django's wife and free her. So they worked together through the winter, and they were very successful together. And then after which they find out that Django's wife was sold to Calvin Candy. Um, so Django's wife is named Broomhilda, which is a German name, and she's being held at the Candyland plantation, which is apparently very well known among slaves, according to Django. So the pair pretend to be interested in buying one of his Mandingo fighters in order to eventually sort of incorporate Broomhilda into that deal and free her. So their plan is discovered by one of Calvin's loyal slaves, and they then end up having a big shootout, and Django is captured and sold as a slave again. But during being transported to his new location, Django convinces the men transporting him that if they help him capture the men on his handbill, he will pay them a lot of money. As soon as they release him, he kills them though, and then he retrieves Broomhilda's papers from the doctor's body, and then he rescues Broomhilda and sets fire to the Candyland estate. So as far as myth goes in this film, um, Broomhilda, her name is based off of a German myth of a princess that gets saved from a dragon, and she's on a mountain surrounded by fire. So in this case, Broomhilda and Django are kind of like the reiteration of this myth in this movie. Another thing that I thought was mythical was Calvin. In the movie, he believes that slaves and their owners have different like a different anatomy in their skulls. So I thought this was like a mythical thing because it's obviously not true, but I think it's something that he truly believes, even though it's false. And another mythical element is the handbill that Django has. So when Django makes his first like successful catch as a bounty hunter, he tells Django that it's good luck to keep your handbill, and this ended up being true because that is what saved him from the transport that he was in, and he was able to go and save his wife after that. So we also see here that Django goes through a hero's journey. He gets the call from action initially from the doctor, and then throughout the movie he develops himself as a character, and at the end he finally ends up rescuing his wife, which was his purpose throughout the whole movie. As far as ritual goes, I think Mandingo fighting was a type of ritual. It's a sport where people would force their slaves to participate in. They would have to fight to the death. Um, I also think the whole routine of the bounty hunters was ritualistic. You know, we see the doctor capture I think more than like four or five people, and he would always have the same sort of way to capture them. He would kill them, and then he would show everyone the bounty, and then he'd end up getting away with what he was doing. And then another ritual element was after they made the deal for Broomhilda, Calvin states that it is custom in that area of the country to shake hands at the end of the deal, and so this is obviously a type of ritual. And he even said that if they do not shake hands, then the deal is legally not official yet. So I thought that was interesting. As far as cinematography goes, this movie is a Tarantino movie, and it is considered a western. Um, and like many other Tarantino movies, there's a element of revenge throughout the story. That's like the main drive of the whole movie. So the purpose of this movie is, I think, it shows many of the ugly truths of slavery. So you get to see how cruel the slaves were treated, and like all the horrible things they had to go through. While at the same time, it it shows the story of an individual slave, in this case Django, getting his own happy ending. So it kind of showed like the reality of slavery, while at the same time showing that that Django got his own happy ending. Um, so yeah, that's what I thought of these movies. Thank you guys, and see you next week.